Hi everyone, welcome to class with Professor Maid. I'm your reluctant YouTube professor. Today we're going to be talking about choosing a topic and a partner. So there are steps in creating an appropriate research question, and there are a couple factors you want to take into account when you're choosing your partner. So let's get started. So when we go to do research, we want to take into account what perspective we're going to take, whether it's going to be a macro level or micro level perspective. In public policy analysis, in social science research, we tend to take a macro level perspective, meaning large scale. So you're looking at cities, states, you're looking at institutions, social structures, those type of things, as opposed to individual interactions or interpersonal interactions. So when we talk about research in general, it can be within any scientific field, but it usually means that we're referring to the process of the steps of research. So the steps of research are a systematic, organized series of steps. And what they want to do, or the reason why we do it, is because we're trying to eliminate bias or ensure maximum objectivity and consistency in researching any particular problem. This is called the scientific method. So it includes defining the problem and creating a research question, reviewing literature, formulating a hypothesis, creating your research method and sampling method, developing and testing data collection with your instruments, data collection and field work, so going out into the field and collecting data, analyzing data and interpreting the results, and then sharing the results. Usually that's through a presentation or a paper, and then repeating that process. So often when you see a diagram of this, the one you'll find in your workbook is usually a circular one, because this process of 8 to 9 steps, they might be called something different in different fields, but the process is essentially the same, and it's considered repetitive. Once you've researched a question or a problem, you become more knowledgeable about it and you develop more questions and problems regarding that particular field. So here's the steps in the research process. You can see again, defining the problem, review the literature, select a design, formulate your hypothesis. Now, the way that I have it flipped. And that's because if you create your design before your hypothesis, it's much more complicated if you are new to research. It is not that big of a deal if you are more experienced in research. You can create your hypothesis before you create your design. Then you would carry out your research, interpret your results, report your findings, and repeat. So in the process of this class, we're actually going to go through every single one of these steps, and today we're going to be talking about defining the problem, which is creating your research question. So the first place we want to start is thinking about what social structures and concepts we're interested in. This gives us a direction to go and where we can find an appropriate research question. So what are you interested in? What type of social structures? So social structures are healthcare, media, government, so it could be policing, judicial system, nonprofit organizations, educational programs. All of these are different types of social structures within our institutional systems. So you want to think about what you're mainly focused on. What are you really interested in? Are you interested in government policies, government judicial systems, policing? Are you interested in healthcare? And then connect that to a particular concept. So something like race, class, gender, sexuality, able-bodiedness, the list goes on, correct? So you can think about access to healthcare based on race, access to nonprofit organizations based on gender or sexuality in the government, in the military, in judicial systems. How does race interplay or class interplay within educational programs? So though, once you start to link those two things together, you have a nice framework to build a question around that's going to be on the more macro level and appropriate for a public policy or social science class. So when you do frame your question, now that you have an idea of which way you want to go, you want to consider several things. A, what you're interested in, because it's obviously going to be easier to do research on something that you actually have an interest in. And then you take those two groups or concepts or institutions and think about it in terms of what's the difference between two of these, or what's the relationship between two. So what's the difference between how Black and white people are treated in policing? What's the relationship between military policies and judicial policies in the government? What is the relationship or the interaction between education and healthcare, or media and education? What's the relationship or interaction between race and education, or sexuality and media? What's the relationship or interaction between these concepts and these social structures? So that's a way in which you can create your question from the ideas, the social structures and concepts that you've defined as of interest to you. Okay, so I think we were talking about things to avoid. The psychological questions. Why do teenagers get depressed? That's one that I hear a lot. Overly simplistic questions. How many people would consider themselves at risk within the education system? That's, essentially counting cogs. Anything that you're just counting and you're not taking into account complexity, that's something you want to avoid. And then anything that's closed-ended, yes or no, simple yes or no answers. So write a few drafts and then ask somebody, friends, family, or your partner if you can, to identify if you've avoided these things. So frame your question. So the first thing you want to do is to make sure you frame your question in a way that's practical. Now, it's not the most important thing right now. We can be quite lofty and large before we do our lit review, and then we can narrow it down as we gain some experience and understanding of our topic. But think about the future of doing research on this within this semester, right? Do you have access to this type of information that could answer your question? And you may have more access than you realize. Can you answer the question within the time frame of the class? Can you limit the scope, right? So instead of all women, it can be, women within America and that type of thing. So knowing that you're going to reduce the scope and frame, possibly in the future. It doesn't necessarily have to be done right now, because if you keep it broad in category at the moment, it gives you the opportunity to find a subtopic within your literature, because you're going to become an expert on the topic by doing research and seeing what other experts have to say. Okay. So your workbook will guide you through this, right? So to choose your topic, you're going to go through the workbook and do the practice section. It's going to ask you to select your general subject areas, your concepts of social structures, to narrow it to things that you can consider, to make sure you're adopting a macro level perspective, and then also narrow to a practical scope, and then to write your tentative question. So the way that the workbook is set up, it's a Word document, so it does move around. Don't freak out when it moves around. I'm going to get down. But it's written in kind of plain language. It's guiding you through. It's asking you to put in information into the boxes, and then it's trying to lead you through that cognitive process so that you can come out at the other end with a workable tentative question. So I hope this helps. And the last thing we want to talk about, I almost forgot, is choosing a partner. So either before or after you have your topic, we're going to talk about probably in our first meeting, And try to find a partner who has a similar work schedule to you. So if you work weekends, you want them to work weekends, or if you're a 9-to-5 job, that's what you want as well. Do you tend to like to do your homework during the work week or the weekend? Are you an early bird type A who wants to get it done early so you don't have to think about it? Or do you like to wait until the last minute? Do you work during the day or do you work late at night? So if you're having communication with them, are you up until midnight, 1, 2 in the morning? And that's when you're awake and thinking and want to talk to them, or are you early in the morning or midday? So take those things into consideration when you're choosing your partner, and have a great day.